The sun was high in the sky, casting long shadows across the busy hospital courtyard. People moved in and out, some in a hurry, others dragging their feet as if weighed down by invisible burdens. Ada and Chioma sat under the shade of a large mango tree, fanning themselves with their hands. The hospital visit had taken longer than they expected, and they were tired of waiting. Welcome to Tales by Steph, a home of interesting African stories. "I can't believe we've been here for hours," Chioma complained, wiping the sweat off her forehead. "My legs are paining me." Ada nodded, stretching her feet. "I know. Hospitals are always like this. Too many people, not enough doctors." They had come to visit Ada's aunt, who had been admitted 2 days ago. After spending hours in the crowded waiting area, they were finally allowed to see her. The visit was brief, and after a few words of encouragement and promises to come back, they left her to rest. As they waited for Ada's uncle to come pick them up, Chioma shifted uncomfortably. "I need to pee," she whispered, glancing around. Ada raised an eyebrow. "Here? Can't you wait?" Chioma shook her head, her face scrunching up. "I can't hold it. It's really bad." Ada sighed. "All right, let's go inside and look for the toilet." Chioma shook her head again, this time more firmly. "The lines inside are too long. Remember how crowded it was? I'll just go behind somewhere." Ada looked around. The hospital grounds were large, with several buildings spread out over green lawns and flower beds. At the far end, away from the main entrance, was the old morgue. It stood separate from the rest of the hospital, surrounded by tall weeds and broken fences. Most people avoided it, saying it was haunted. Ada and Chioma had heard the stories, but like most young girls, they brushed them off as tales meant to scare little children. "There!" Chioma pointed towards the back of the morgue. "Nobody goes there. I can quickly pee, and we'll come back." Ada hesitated, glancing at the cracked walls of the morgue and the wild grass growing tall around it. "Are you sure?" Chioma waved her hand dismissively. "It's just for a minute. I can't hold it any longer." Reluctantly, Ada followed her friend, their slippers slapping against the concrete as they walked. The air grew cooler as they approached the morgue, shadows stretching long and dark over the uneven ground. The place was eerily silent, the noise of the busy hospital fading away the closer they got. "Quickly!" Ada urged, glancing around nervously. Chioma nodded, ducking behind the building where the grass grew wild and thick. Ada waited, tapping her foot impatiently, her eyes darting around. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Goosebumps prickled her skin as she glanced at the narrow windows of the morgue, all of them shut tight. "Hurry up!" she called out, her voice a bit shaky. "Almost done," Chioma replied from behind the bush. A crow cawed loudly from a nearby tree, making Ada jump. She glared at it, but it only stared back with beady black eyes, unmoving. "Okay, I'm done," Chioma announced, stepping back onto the path. "Let's go." Ada wasted no time, grabbing Chioma's hand and practically dragging her back towards the main building. Chioma laughed, stumbling as she tried to keep up. "Why are you running? Scared of ghosts?" "I just don't like that place," Ada replied, not slowing down. "It feels wrong." Chioma only laughed harder. "You and your imagination." But even as they walked back to the main courtyard, Ada couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed them, that the shadows stretched just a little bit longer behind them, creeping closer, step by step. When they finally sat back under the mango tree, Chioma leaned back with a sigh. "See? No big deal." But Ada didn't answer. Her eyes were still fixed on the path they had just come from, her heart thumping hard in her chest. And far off, behind the morgue, the crow cawed again, its cry echoing through the air like a warning. The next morning, Ada woke up with a heavy feeling pressing down on her chest. Her room felt colder than usual, and the windows rattled slightly even though there was no breeze. She sat up, rubbing her eyes, and glanced around. Everything seemed normal, but something felt different. She tried to shake off the feeling as she got ready for school, but it lingered, clinging to her like a shadow. When she stepped outside, the sun was shining bright, but the warmth didn't reach her skin. It was as if an invisible cloud hung over her, following her every step. At the school gate, she saw Chioma waiting, waving excitedly. Ada forced a smile and walked over, but she could tell something was off. Chioma's eyes were darker, almost sunken, and her usual bright smile seemed a bit forced. "Did you sleep well?" Ada asked as they walked into the school compound. Chioma shrugged. "Not really. I had strange dreams." Ada glanced at her. "What kind of dreams?" Chioma hesitated, her fingers twisting around her skirt. "I don't know. I can't really remember. Just shadows and whispers." A chill ran down Ada's spine. She opened her mouth to speak, but the school bell rang, cutting her off. "We better get to class," she said quickly. Throughout the day, Ada couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. In class, she would catch glimpses of movement from the corner of her eye, but when she turned, there was nothing there. At first, she thought she was just imagining things. Maybe it was the stories her grandmother used to tell her, the ones about spirits that linger in places where they were not respected. But when Chioma collapsed during the lunch break, Ada knew something was terribly wrong. They had been sitting under the big Iroko tree, sharing ground nuts and laughing about their teachers, when Chioma suddenly went silent. Her eyes went wide, and her body stiffened, fingers clawing at her neck. Ada screamed for help as Chioma fell to the ground, her body shaking violently. Teachers and students rushed over, but Chioma stopped convulsing just as quickly as she had started. Her eyes fluttered open and she stared up at the sky, her lips moving silently. Ada knelt beside her, holding her hand. "Chioma, what happened?" Chioma blinked, her eyes glassy. "They were there, behind the morgue. They were whispering my name." Ada's blood ran cold. "Who? Who was whispering?" Chioma turned her head slowly, her gaze locking with Ada's. "The ones we disturbed." Ada felt her heart thump wildly. "You're just scared. Maybe it was just a nightmare." Chioma shook her head slowly, her eyes filling with tears. "No, they followed us, Ada. I can feel them. They're here." A gust of wind swept through the courtyard, sending dust swirling around them. The teachers helped Chioma to her feet and led her to the sickbay, but she kept looking back, her eyes wide and fearful. Ada stood frozen, watching her friend disappear into the building. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering despite the sunlight. Something had changed since they went behind that morgue. Something dark had followed them back, and it wasn't going to leave. Days had passed since Chioma's sudden collapse at school, but the shadows of that event still lingered. Ada tried to shake it off, but she couldn't ignore the way Chioma had whispered about the whispers behind the morgue. Something about it clung to her thoughts, like smoke that wouldn't clear. At first, everything seemed normal. Chioma came back to school the next day, her usual lively self, laughing and chatting as if nothing had happened. But Ada noticed the subtle changes, how Chioma would sometimes pause, her eyes unfocused, as if listening to something only she could hear. Sometimes she would flinch at nothing, her hand brushing over her neck where she had clawed at it during the episode. "Are you sure you're okay?" Ada asked her one afternoon as they walked home from school. Chioma forced a smile. "Of course. It was probably just malaria or something. My mother gave me herbs to drink." But Ada was not convinced. She had heard the whispers, too, soft, barely audible, like a breath against her ear when she was alone. At first, she thought it was the wind, but then she began to hear her name, faint and distant, carried on the breeze even when the air was still. One night, as she lay in bed, the whispers grew louder. Ada pulled her covers up to her chin, her eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. The voice was soft, almost gentle, but there was something wrong about it. It spoke her name again and again, stretching out each syllable. Ada, Ada. She squeezed her eyes shut, pressing her hands over her ears, but it did not stop. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until she finally sat up, her heart pounding. "Who is there?" she whispered into the darkness. Silence. She held her breath, listening, but there was nothing. No whisper, no breeze, only the steady thump of her heartbeat in her ears. She lay back down slowly, pulling the covers over her head, and tried to sleep. The next morning, Ada woke up to find scratches on her arms. Thin red lines that crisscrossed her skin as if she had clawed herself during the night. Her mother noticed them during breakfast. "Ada, what happened to your hands?" she asked, her brow creased with worry. Ada stared at the marks, her mind blank. I don't know." Her mother clicked her tongue, shaking her head. "You girls play too rough. You better be careful." Ada only nodded, but deep inside, she knew she had not done it to herself. She had gone to bed fine and woken up like this. But how? The whispers continued, sometimes faint, sometimes loud, always calling her name. Ada tried to ignore them, but they grew stronger each day, creeping into her mind, unsettling her thoughts. When she told Chioma about it, her friend only gave her a long, hard look. "You too?" Chioma asked quietly. Ada's eyes widened. "You hear it too?" Chioma nodded slowly, her hands trembling. "And sometimes I see them." "See what?" Ada asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. Chioma looked around nervously before leaning in. "The shadows, they stand outside my window at night, watching, waiting." A chill ran down Ada's spine. "What do they want?" Chioma swallowed hard, her eyes glistening with fear. "I don't know, but I think they followed us from behind the morgue." Ada's heart pounded in her chest. The memories of that day came rushing back. The silence, the cawing crow, the way the shadows seemed to stretch longer than they should have. She shivered despite the warm sun shining overhead. "What are we going to do?" Ada asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Chioma looked away, her gaze fixed on the distant hills. "I don't know, but we need to find out, before it's too late." The whispers grew louder with each passing day. Ada and Chioma tried to go about their normal lives, but the shadows followed them everywhere, at school, at home, even in their dreams. It was as if the air around them had grown heavier, pressing down on their chests, making it hard to breathe. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the shadows stretched long across the ground, Ada couldn't take it anymore. She marched over to Chioma's house, her heart thumping wildly. She knocked on the door, and Chioma opened it almost immediately, her eyes wide and bloodshot. "You too?" Chioma asked before Ada could say a word. Ada nodded, stepping inside quickly. "We can't keep living like this. We have to do something." Chioma's hands shook as she poured them both cups of water. "Do what?" "They follow us everywhere. I hear them at night. I see them in my dreams. It's like they're waiting for something." Ada took a deep breath. "We have to go back." Chioma's eyes widened. "Back? To the morgue? Are you crazy?" "Think about it," Ada said, leaning forward. "That's where it started. Maybe if we go back, we can end it." Chioma stared into her cup, her hands trembling. Finally, she nodded. "Tonight. We do it tonight." The girls waited until the moon was high and the streets were silent. Wrapping themselves in shawls, they crept out of their homes and met at the edge of the hospital grounds. The air was thick with mist, and the distant call of nightbirds echoed in the darkness. The morgue loomed ahead of them, its windows dark and unblinking. The grass rustled as they walked, brushing against their legs like ghostly fingers. Neither of them spoke as they approached the back of the building, the place where it had all begun. "This is it," Ada whispered, her breath coming out in clouds. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small bottle of holy water her grandmother had blessed. "Just in case," she said, handing Chioma a small wooden cross. Chioma took it, clutching it tightly. "What do we do now?" Before Ada could answer, the whispers began. Soft at first, like the rustling of leaves, then louder, swirling around them like a whirlwind. Ada and Chioma held hands, their eyes darting around as shadows began to gather, stretching and twisting in the moonlight. "We're sorry!" Chioma shouted, her voice cracking. "We didn't mean to disrespect you!" The whispers grew louder, almost deafening as the shadows took form, tall, thin figures with hollow eyes that stared back at them. Ada's hands shook as she opened the bottle of holy water and flung droplets into the darkness. "Leave us alone!" she screamed. For a moment, everything stopped. The air grew still, the whispers silenced. The shadows flickered, almost retreating. But then one stepped forward, its eyes locking with Ada's. It raised a long, thin finger and pointed towards the back of the morgue. Ada swallowed hard. "We have to go there," she whispered, her voice shaking. "No," Chioma whimpered, pulling back. "Yes," Ada insisted, squeezing her friend's hand. "It's the only way." Together they stepped forward, their footsteps crunching over dry leaves and broken glass. The shadows parted, making a path that led to a small, hidden doorway. It was old, covered in vines and nearly invisible in the darkness. With trembling hands, Ada pushed it open. A gust of cold air rushed out, carrying with it the smell of damp earth and something older. Something ancient. Inside, the room was dark, the only light coming from the moon filtering through cracks in the walls. In the center of the room lay a stone slab, covered in dust and cobwebs. Carved into its surface were symbols neither of them could understand. "What is this place?" Chioma whispered, her voice echoing. Ada stepped forward, running her hands over the carvings. "I don't know, but I think this is what they wanted us to find." Suddenly, the whispers returned, louder than ever. The shadows pressed in, swirling around them, blocking the exit. Chioma screamed, clutching the cross tighter. Ada didn't think. She raised the holy water and poured it over the slab, chanting the prayers her grandmother had taught her. The shadows screamed, a sound that shook the walls and made the ground tremble. One by one, they began to disappear, pulled back into the cracks of the walls, fading into nothingness. When the last whisper faded, the room fell silent. The air grew warmer, lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted. Ada and Chioma stood in silence, catching their breath. Just as they turned to leave, an old woman appeared in the doorway. She was dressed in white, her eyes gleaming with something ancient. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have set us free." Before Ada or Chioma could respond, the woman faded away, like mist blown by the wind. The girls stepped out into the moonlight, hand in hand. The morgue stood silent, its windows still and empty. As they walked away, Ada looked back one last time and smiled. The whispers were gone. The shadows had disappeared. And the air, for the first time in weeks, was finally clear. As they left the hospital grounds, Ada turned to Chioma. "Do you think it's really over?" Chioma paused, glancing back at the morgue, now bathed in moonlight. "I think so. But we should never forget. Some doors are better left unopened." The two friends walked back into the village, the night finally silent, and behind them, the morgue stood still, watching, waiting, but quiet at last. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, like, and comment.